The recent Brilliant Star set is undoubtedly one of the best sets we've seen in the Sword and Shield era of the Pokemon TCG, giving us plenty of cards that are currently massively shaking up the game right now. But there is still a handful of trash in Brilliant Stars as well, even if it's not necessarily dragging down the overall quality of this set. So since I already counted down my picks for the top 10 best cards from Brilliant Stars on the channel recently, which you can find linked down below in the description, today we're going to switch things up and count down my picks for the top 5 worst cards that Brilliant Stars has unfortunately plagued us with, as well as my picks for the worst non-evolving Pokemon V and worst Pokemon VSTAR or VMAX as well. I am going to separate these from the main part of the countdown just because, on average, even the worst Pokemon V is going to be a good bit better than most of the normal cards that come out in this set. But I do have one more rule I am going to put in place for this countdown. The only Pokemon eligible to appear are either going to be fully evolved or non-evolving Pokemon. Just because otherwise this countdown would probably just degenerate into a list of 5 basic Pokemon with 60 HP that do 10 damage for 1 energy. And I think you would agree that's not going to make for a very fun video to watch. But with all that out the way, remember to smack that like button to feed the always hungry YouTube algorithm. And let's jump in and check out my picks for the worst cards from Brilliant Stars. Up first, we have the worst Pokemon V of the set, and my pick has to be Drampa V here. Truly awful card. This card was originally released in Japan as a promo in some starter decks, and it definitely shows when looking at this thing. Spike Draw just does 20 for 1, draws 2 cards. This attack isn't too great, but this is just kind of meant to be like an early game setup attack, so we can kind of excuse the underpowered nature of this one. But looking at Dragon Pulse, this is not much better. For 3 colorless energy, does 160, and you discard the top 2 cards of your deck. Now, don't get it misconstrued, 160 isn't the worst number in the world. You know, we can 2-shot Pokemon VMAX, we have things like Choice Belt to creep us up to be able to 1-shot some of the basic Pokemon V, like Genesect and Crobat. But here's the thing, as a basic Pokemon V, compare this to some of the other prevalent ones that are in the game, like Zacian V, Suicune V, even Entei V, which just came out. They can hit for higher amounts of damage than this. They hit stuff for weakness, and they don't discard the top 2 cards of their deck. There were definitely a few bad Pokemon V in the set, but Drampa absolutely had to be my pick. And taking the spot for the worst evolving Pokemon V in the set, we have Kingler VMAX. So these attacks in a vacuum really aren't that horrible. 240 for 3 is right in line with other things we've seen like Zacian V, and being able to accelerate 5 energy into play is definitely a good form of energy acceleration. But the issue with Kingler is that these attacks are on an evolution. These are the types of attacks we want on a basic. Because if we're using this first attack to accelerate energy to our board, that means we're not really doing damage until turn 3. And had we just played something else like Melanie or Frostmoth or even Frostlass, we could power up other, quite frankly, better water attackers and do more damage more quickly as early as even turn 1 with things like Suicune V. So I knew this was definitely going to be a toss-up between Kingler VMAX and Aggron VMAX. Definitely, I think, the worst evolving Pokemon V that we have in the set. And if you want to swap this out for Aggron, I wouldn't blame you, but these were absolutely much worse than any of the V-Stars that we got in this set. But getting into the actual top 5 here, we have Cleansing and Hunting Gloves, the latest incarnation of some consistently horrible Pokemon tools that we've been getting the past couple of sets. So these things, while attached, allow you to do 30 more damage to your opponent's active either Psychic or Dragon Pokemon in this instance. The issue these cards have is that the format usually isn't highly centralized around just one type or even 2 types for you to be able to play these as effective tech cards. And then also there's the big elephant in the room. We just had Choice Belt printed in the same set, which is a far more universally useful card, casting a pretty long shadow that these cards are going to have to live in. Honestly, the only reason these cards aren't at the number 1 spot is because eventually they are going to quit printing Pokemon V, and there is some extremely small chance that these cards could become useful against future ultra rare mechanics when the inevitable Pokemon Scarlet and Violet sets do come out. Next up at number 4, we have Torkoal. Torkoal is a basic fire Pokemon with 120 HP and a 2 retreat cost, so those things are at least kind of decent, but the attacks aren't doing this card any favors. So you might be thinking, well, you know, in theory, we could use something like Magma Basin plus a Twin Energy to get Guard Press powered up in a single turn. You could play maybe some things like Cape of Toughness as well. But at the end of the day, most of the attacks in the game right now are hitting over 200 anyways, making any sort of tanking efforts honestly in vain, since they're not really going to prevent a one-shot against almost every deck that's running around right now. And on top of that, if we do want a single prize fire attacker, in what world are we not just playing Moltres? Moltres can do 90 for a single energy. And since, as I just mentioned, the tanking doesn't even really matter, Torkoal is just going to be a much worse version of another card that we just got in the same set. At that point, we're just kind of left wondering, why in the world would we ever play this card? And the answer is, you wouldn't. Next up at number 3, we have Executor. Executor is going to be a stage 1 Pokemon with a quite tanky 140 HP, so I will at least give a little bit credit where it's due here, but the attacks, much like with Torkoal, get much worse. Its first attack for a grass and 2 colorless to 70, and you heal 30 from this Pokemon, and its other attack for a grass and 3 colorless does a flat 130. This heal 30 is pretty much irrelevant. Anything in the game right now hits above 140. And do I really need to point out how skewed this damage to energy ratio is for the second attack? 4 energy to do 130. Of course, we could compare this to all of the different Pokemon V that hit above 200 for just 2 attachments, but even ignoring those, just think of other stage 1 Pokemon that are better than this. Think of Mad Party, the Salazzle deck. And we haven't even brought up either, how are we going to power this thing up? Obviously, the big partner you could look to is something like Cherrim, but Executor is just far outclassed by other much better cards that you could play with Cherrim, or really almost any deck for that matter. Next up at number 2, we have Cinccino, which is really ironic because the Minccino that we got in this set is substantially better than its evolution here. But Cinccino here is a new stage 1 with 90 HP. So again, I will give credit on some of these HPs. 90 is actually useful because we can at least search this out with Level Ball. But the attacks really couldn't be too much worse if they tried. So I probably don't even need to point out how there is a much better Cinccino that's already in the format, which also has an attack for a single energy that does 40 damage. But the thing is, the other Cinccino, of course, has a great ability that allows us to draw cards, and the attack also accelerates energy for the same damage and attack cost as this Cinccino. And while 2 for potentially 150 isn't the worst, you have to flip heads on all 3 coins, and pretty much any other somewhat decent stage 1 can hit for the same amount of damage for the same amount of energy, I'll point out too, much easier than Cinccino ever could. There's absolutely no universe where anyone should ever even consider playing this over the Cinccino that came out in Sword and Shield. Coming in at number 1, the biggest turd of the set, the worst card of Brilliant Stars, in my opinion, is going to be the brand new Throw. Throw here is a basic with 120 HP, so I will at least give a shout out to that. But it has Psychic Weakness and a 3 retreat cost, and then 2 totally, utterly useless attacks. So not only are these attacks just really uninteresting to begin with, but also too, they're just really underpowered for these energy costs. We can even compare Throw to another card we already saw in this countdown. We looked at Torkoal, which has the same first attack, but on a coin flip, you can sometimes get an additional 30 damage. And its second attack, 3 for 110. Come on, are we serious? Fighting is already a type that is notoriously difficult to power up as it is. And even if you are dead set on playing this with something like a Colossal, there's other basic attackers that just completely outshine this thing. But even putting multi-prize Pokemon aside, there's still other random things that I would much rather play than this thing, like Landorus that we just got back in Fusion Strike, or even things like Stonjourner that can be played in single strike decks instead. When I say there is no practical competitive application for Throw, I genuinely mean that. And that's why it's going to take the number 1 spot as my pick personally for the worst card in Brilliant Stars. And with that, of course, we have reached the end of this countdown. And I'm not gonna lie, if I wanted to, I probably could have turned this into a top 10, but also that's what the comment section is for, guys. If your picks are gonna differ from mine, feel free to sound off down below in the comment section. What are your picks for the worst cards in Brilliant Stars? Do you agree with the order of the list that I have today? Feel free to sound off down below. But as always, if you did enjoy me dunking on these bad cards today, be sure to leave a like on this video. And if you want to take your support to the next level, you can always become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg, or pick up some merch over at rarecandytcg.com. Links will be down below in the description. And if you want to see a countdown that ends on a more positive note, feel free to check out my recent video for the top 10 best cards from Brilliant Stars as well. But as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.